In this video, we're going to discuss what happens when you get burned out on your role-playing love and what you can do to rekindle that passion. Let's talk about it here in the next 20 or so minutes. Hey everybody, this is Auticus. It's been a little while since I've streamed to my channel. If you're not new here, then most of my material has been around tabletop wargaming. And I'm kind of shifting gears as I have put tabletop wargaming on the shelf for a little while. And I've been trying to get back to my role-playing roots. Now the problem I've had and why I decided to make a video about this is I have for probably 14, 15 years have not really had the same bug or bite or passion towards RPGs that I once had. And part of me attributes that to just getting older, losing interest in the things that you once liked. That's a normal part of life, but I don't know if that's necessarily the case. So I sat down and examined what it is that I want out of a game and what is it that current games aren't giving me that maybe if I had those things again that I loved, I could rekindle that interest. So let's go back. There's two main pieces to this. There's the right hand and the left hand. Or if you're watching on the screen, the left hand and the right hand. What I'm looking for out of a game and player expectations in the other hand, and why those two things are hard to marry. So if we go all the way back to where I began, I started with Dungeons and Dragons in 1987. I was very young. I was 10 years old, and I had played a game at recess. And I didn't really understand the game at that point or what it was that I was actually doing necessarily, but that was my first look at Dungeons and Dragons. And after that, it kind of got put away, and I hadn't touched it again. It won't be for another few months. My introduction into fantasy style games actually came a couple months later. And that was with a series of books called the Lone Wolf books, written by Joe Deaver. And I still have these on my shelf behind me. In these books, these were your 1980s game books where you chose your own adventure, you rolled dice, you were a powerful warrior, ranger in this case, and that really pulled me in. I got as many of these books as I could, and I loved it. But it wasn't until the summer of 1988 that I would really get sucked into role-playing games. And the summer of 1988 was an important year for me because that was the year I discovered Dungeons and Dragons for real, heavy metal music, and girls. So that was a monumental summer for me. Now, this was also at the height of the Satanic Panic. And my mother had warned me about this game called Dungeons and Dragons and how it was a game for the devil. And it was a game created by Satan to recruit young boys into these cults. And the rule books had like real magic spells and pornography and all these things. So naturally, I was intrigued. It was that summer that it was during a sleepover. It was me and two friends of mine. We had been watching a 1980s. We were watching HBO, and Knight Rider was on. And Knight Rider, not the car, but Knight Riders was a movie with knights that rode motorcycles and they jousted. And one of my friends suggested, he said, "Hey, my mother's boyfriend plays Dungeons and Dragons. I can get the books. You guys want to play?" So sure. So we played. We got the books and we started playing. And this was the very first book that I was introduced to for Dungeons and Dragons. And of course, being what we were 11 or 12-year-old kids at that time, all I remember out of that session was we created fighters and minotaurs, broke into the inn that we were staying in, and we died. And that was it. But at that point, I was hooked. And I was hooked because you could do anything you wanted. It was a game where you could literally do whatever you felt was plausible, and a DM would interpret that for you, and you could build your own worlds. And it was at this point really in my life that I had become super creative. I started getting really big into art, music. I wanted to create things. So we played Dungeons and Dragons a total of 4 times. Now remember, my mother was dead set against this game. So what had happened was I had borrowed these books and I took them home for whatever reason. I was probably trying to hand copy because we were really poor and I wasn't allowed to get the books anyway. So I wanted to hand copy some things. And she went through my room and found the books and burned them. And that was Dungeons and Dragons for me for a while. Now, I was not allowed to play D&D because it was evil. Instead, I was allowed to play Middle-earth role-playing. And so I started playing Middle-earth role-playing in 1989. And this became the game that basically I played throughout most of high school. And Middle-earth role-playing and D&D, there's very little difference between them other than the mechanics. Obviously, D&D is based off Lord of the Rings, so there's wizards and demons and Balrogs and all kinds of things. But I was allowed to play that and not D&D, so I wasn't going to complain. It was in 1993, my junior year in high school, where the itch started coming back. I really, really wanted to play D&D. It was the art, to be honest, but there were people who played it in school, and as I listened to them play, there was the story, it was the tension, it was all of that, all of those things that I love. I wanted a part of that, so I went to the mall, and I bought this. So this is my first handbook. This is AD&D Second Edition. This came out in 1989. I bought this in 1993. I've had this book since then. It's dog-eared. It's been through high school. It's been through my tour in Korea. It's been through all kinds of things. And I also bought a module that I wanted to run that looked really cool. The Haunted Halls of Evening Star. So these are and I still own this. I still have this in my library in another room. It's super dog-eared. But this was my first adventure that I had bought with my own money to run. Now, over the years, of course, I've collected like Isle of Dread, and I have all the boxes, and I have the red box, the white box. I have pretty sizable collection, but these were the games that I was actually playing. And in 1993, I married my Middle-earth campaign to a D&D campaign. And the girl who introduced me to D&D back in 1987, Michelle, was also a part of this group, as well as a couple other people that were part of the normal D&D group in high school. And the thing that caught me the most was we were going to bring in existing Middle-earth characters, and they were going to bring in their existing D&D characters, and we made the Middle-earth characters Dungeons and Dragons. And the thing that caught me, and I still remember to this day, was thinking how cool it was that these new players, they were using existing characters from other campaigns. And they had their own backstories, and they had the things that they had done and how they acquired all their items. And I thought that was really neat. And we ended up playing, sessions between D&D, and then I would have to play Middle-earth when I was at home. I couldn't play D&D at home. I kept my books in my locker, and that's how I stopped them from being burned a second time. So anyhow, second edition was pretty much my game of choice, and it is still, to this day, I would call home for me. Third edition came out in 2000. I actually really liked third edition, but third edition was where the problem started to creep in. The biggest part of third edition that I loved was the switch over to the D20 system and getting rid of THAC0. I also liked how Wizards started to become more useful. But it wasn't until essentially 2008 when fourth edition came out, I lost a lot of my interest in D&D. And it just became a side thing. And I have primarily been my adult life, while I have played role-playing games pretty much regularly forever, tabletop wargaming was my number one love. And tabletop wargaming, as the years went on, its direction started to change as well. And I started getting disenfranchised with that. So I guess the moral of that story is, in that long-winded rant, as you get older, the things you like start to become less popular. What's popular today in 10 years will be not popular, and then what's popular today in 20 years will be looked at as bad, is often the case. So, and especially with gaming, it's when you look through the lens of even the 80s and 90s, it's deemed bad. You just have to realize that's marketing, and that's just the way it is. So, I want to get back into role playing, and fourth edition D&D wasn't my bag at all. Fourth edition, if they had called it World of Warcraft role playing game, I probably wouldn't have had as much of a problem with it because that's what it seemed like to me. It was emulating World of Warcraft. It just wasn't my thing. And when fifth edition came out, I was excited at first until I had actually played it a couple times. And there's just pieces in fifth edition that don't call to me or actively dampen my enthusiasm. And now there's D&D One, which they're taking the mechanics that I don't like and they're cranking them up to 11. So you come to, I'm at a point where like I want to continue to do these games, but I don't enjoy what's going on. Now I run a fifth edition. Me and my fiance run a fifth edition group, and it's an enjoyable group, and I enjoy playing. But I don't yearn for it like I used to with my older campaigns. And I also run a Dungeon Crawl Classics campaign, which I'm transforming into a West Marches campaign, which I'll discuss in a future video on how that's going. And I'm actually really excited about that. I'm really excited for the first time in many, many years to world build and create and play. Very enthused. But I want to look at the crux of the issue is why was I not excited anymore? What was dampening my excitement? Is it just I'm getting old? Is it just that I just outgrown these things that I used to love? And I don't think that's the case. So let's look at what, for me, how I want to rekindle my love for role-playing games. How I want to get back into loving this hobby going forward into my later years. So the things that I look for in a game are what excited me and drew me that modern games don't do. And I want to caveat everything I say at this point can be countered with, yeah, but you can do that in 5th edition if you house roll. And I'm going to discuss the other hand about why that's not a thing that I want to do as much once I discuss in this hand the things that I love. So number one, the things that I love about D&D and why I played. It was the tension at the table. I loved the tension at the table. I loved that feeling of danger, and this is both as a DM and a player. I loved knowing that when my character stepped out the door to enter a dungeon, he could die. I loved that as you're exploring a wilderness, you don't know what to expect. You could run into something helpful. You could run into something that wants to hurt you, but you could run into a dragon that can kill you. You don't know. There was that feeling of not knowing. And when I DM'd my games in 2nd edition and even in 3rd edition, I never knew what was going to happen as a DM. And to this day, I don't like the railroad adventures. I do not like them. I don't get into them. I liked not knowing. I liked letting my players basically drive the game. And it was them driving the game that would reveal story hooks naturally and organically that led to stories that I still remember to this day. I can't really tell you a lot of the stuff I've done in 4th and 5th edition because they've all been basically pre-baked modules, and they're railroad stories. Or if I've played with other DMs, it's railroad stories where they have a linear plot and you have to follow it. And if you like that kind of thing, that's fine. I'm not going to bash on that and say that it's bad. It's just not for me. It's not what excites me. I liked not knowing what was going to happen. When I sat in that high school listening to the D&D players play, I remember very, very clearly the module that was running. It was a guy named Jeff Pieper, and he was their DM, and Mike was the player, and he was running them off in a solo because they would do weekly groups, but then he'd run them solo to catch things up, or because he really had this branching structure going with his games, and he was a genius. I mean, for a 15, 16-year-old boy, he was a genius. He was really, really smart, and he was a really, really good storyteller. Just from me listening to him, but I remember, and he may have been lifting Castle Ravenloft. I don't remember, but I remember Mike's character was in a vampire's crypt or castle, so that's why I think it was Ravenloft. But Jeff could have redid this on his own, for all I know. I was not a part of the campaign, but anyhow, Mike's character was 7th or 8th level, or maybe it was a high level character, because back then it took you a couple years of real time to get to 7th or 8th level. To survive and get there was an achievement unto itself. And the look on his face, because he knew he was in a vampire's crypt, and I remember he was sitting there, and his fingers were steepled in front of him. He had this look of expressed concern on his face because he knew his character could either die or at the very least, vampires took levels. When they touched you, they could take 2 levels away from you, and that's a huge deal. So he had to approach that game with the utmost care and tactics in terms of, as a player, he had to find a way to avoid fighting the vampire in a head-on assault to defeat him. And I don't remember if he did or not. I remember he found a mirror, and that was all I can really remember. And you're talking about something that happened 35 years ago or whatever. So I don't remember all the details, but it was that feeling of tension, and it was really about the players having to overcome these things that could kill them. They had to be smart. They couldn't just go direct assault everything. That's honestly the big thing that I miss the most. Number 2, I miss the players being more than their character sheets. I really miss I used to have a notebook full of characters because they were real quick to make in D&D. And today, you've got skills and feats and all these things. I don't really like that as much. I like it to be basic, and I like the players to really make their characters come alive. I don't like easy mode. I don't like how it's right now in 5th edition. It's really hard to die. Like, the expectations, you're not going to die. There's no tension at the table. Now, all those things can be house ruled. There's hardcore 5e. I've discovered a lot of your video or your channels out there, and I honestly, the last week has been amazing for me. I've had so much inspiration and just general enthusiasm that it's excited me enough to actually put a video up on my channel for the first time in a while. I know there's house rules. I know you can go in and say, well, we're not using these rules today. We're not using the death saves. We're not, there's no negative hit points, and there's different ways you can make D&D 5 more lethal. But that goes into, what I said, the other hand. The other hand is player expectations. Player expectations I've started noticing it, and this was in tabletop wargaming as well as role-playing game, probably around the mid-2000s. And I want to say the internet was probably a large precursor to that. Because with the internet, people could, you can talk, and it became a thing where if you died in a game, that was started to be seen as bad. I have many, and I'll share a couple here because they are relevant to this point. But players don't expect to die. The expectation with a lot of players is if you do die, that's bad, and the DM is a bad DM if he let his players die. Fudging dice rolls is common. DMs that pull attacks off characters that are hurt is common. None of those things. Those aren't addition, right? So 5th edition doesn't say don't kill your characters. It's just the expectation. And when you're playing modern games and you're playing with modern players, the expectation is I'm not going to die. And the expectation is I'm going to win. The expectation is that anything you throw at me is going to be balanced, and I should be able to beat it in combat. And they do. You watch game. I've watched game after game. I've played in game after game where everything that's an adversary is just directly assaulted, because the expectation is if the DM put this out here, I should be able to beat it. My group should be able to defeat it. Player death being bad. This stretches back at least to the mid-2000s. And honestly, in AD&D, players didn't love when their characters died, but the fuss didn't start until like 2005 or so. 2010, I was invited to run a game for one of my friends. He was in my band at the time, and he played in my group. He had been a player in our group for a couple of years, and he wanted to DM. So he had his own group, and he was excited. And he asked me to come DM because he was excited to share the things that I had taught him with his group. And so I did it, and very vividly remember this. I will never forget this because it's a negative experience, and it's something I don't want to happen again. And I've had it unfortunately happen several times. But one of the players was a barbarian, and he kicked open all the doors, and the rest of the party just let him do it. So they're in a dungeon, and he's kicking doors down, and he's running through the dungeon by himself. And he ends up kicking the door down to the dungeon of the boss fight by himself. And the party is across the table. We're using miniatures across the table. No one's there to support him, and he charges the boss. And the boss had 2 like lieutenants with him and some mooks, some minions, and they all ganged up on him and killed him. And he was enraged, and he left. He slammed his fist on the table. He left. He was pacing back and forth, screaming about incompetent DM and all this. That's something we don't want to have to deal with. I had a player who dove off of a hill. We were defending a hill from a horde of minions, and they dove off the hill, and it was awesome because they did it to save their friends' lives. It was a great story, and they died because there was just so many monsters around that, of course, you're going to die. And they sent this wall of angry text to me about how a horrible DM let their character die. So these are, and I have a lot of stories like this. It's not just those 2, and I could ramble probably for an hour. I'm not going to do that. But the point of all that is player expectations is they're not going to die. And if they do die, that is seen as a really negative experience. And so as a DM, I don't want to be yelled at or screamed at or, as has happened to me, have someone come down and want to fight me in the parking lot because I'm using house rules. Those are all things that have happened. Those are all things that I'm not interested in repeating. So that's kind of why I've shied away from public games and looking for games in general, is just because and it's not, you can't even say it's common. It's usually 1 in 5 players is like this, or they have a tendency to get very angry. It's just not, it's not an enjoyable time. So that's why modern games don't do it for me. They don't at all, because of the expectation of the players mixed in with the rules kind of support players should win, and there's no tension. I don't like that. So what I've been playing, and we've been playing a lot of this in my group, Dungeon Crawl Classics. Now there are a lot of videos discussing this game. I'm not going to do it here. This is an OSR game. OSR stands for Old School Revival. And it's really trying to recapture the feeling of the older way of playing. And it brings a lot of tension to the table. Things can kill you. You can have a high level character die to something small. And it makes you think really hard about what you should do as a character, as opposed to just attack things. So I'm going to be using that system for West Marches. I'm really excited about starting a West Marches campaign. It's a concept I discovered recently. Believe it or not, I've been playing this game for 35 years or whatever, and this is the first time I really heard of that term. So I'm gonna do some videos on the West Marches campaign and how we're going with that. But I am really excited about playing again. And really what it came down to is I found the game that fits me. 1 D&D is probably not going to be something I look at. I'm not, for a few reasons. It has nothing to do with politics. I don't care about the woke stuff or whatever we want to call it. I buy products based off of the material inside. If it's useful to me, I'll buy it. If it's not, I'm not. I don't care who wrote it. I don't care what the marketing team is doing. I work for a game company. I've been in games for a very long time. I understand what marketing is. Marketing has to be done. None of that is something that I care about. But 1 D&D takes the lethality out of the game even more. It's homogenizing all the species into basically build your own whatever. I don't really like those things. Those aren't games that I'm excited about. If you like that kind of thing, awesome. Gaming should be about what you enjoy and spending time with people and doing the things that you enjoy. I don't enjoy those type of games. And it came down to me having to figure out what it is I wanted, and then actively pursuing those things that I wanted to make it happen. And now I feel as excited as I did 25 years ago when I was world building. So you may have some of your own comments, your own expressions, your own feelings. Please leave some comments below. I appreciate you watching the video. And until then, guys, stay safe, stay happy, get some games in, and we'll talk to you soon.